Thank you, and good evening to everyone. I'm very happy to see you, that you've chosen to come here to investigate this very fascinating topic, because I've always found this topic fascinating. And the full title is What Happens to Me When I Die, and Where Do I Go After Death? And sometimes I'm tempted to ask people, if you had a choice, where would you choose to go? Maybe if I get to speak with you privately, I might ask you that question. Now, the important thing is to bear in mind that the speaker is not an authority. Okay? I'm not here to convince you of anything. I don't want you to just accept what the speaker says, as what we call gospel truth. I use the word gospel because I grew up as a Christian. And I eventually left Christianity behind because it just wasn't satisfying. I was asking too many questions. And as you know, in Christianity, you're not encouraged to question. You just accept and believe, what we call blind faith. And for some people, that is the path. They just don't have a questioning mind. But I was just asking too many questions. I was a born rebel, you may say. I even questioned my parents, even at a young age. So the important thing is the quality of your listening, where your mind is open and you're prepared to investigate, explore. So in that listening, there is your own understanding, not just accepting what the speaker says, because that is not wisdom. Just that you can read many books and have a lot of book knowledge, but that is not wisdom. So the quality of your listening is important, because also many people listen, but they're always reacting. They don't really listen with an open, relaxed mind. They're just listening and just reacting. And if something agrees, with what the speaker believes, they say, oh yeah, good, good, good. But if something is different, they might say, ayo, what is this Bhante saying? And they get confused. Or, what kind of Buddhism is he practicing, or what is he studying? Because sometimes people say that to me. Maybe you're reading too many New Age philosophy, or New Age philosophy that has nothing to do with Buddhism, with Dharma. So that quality of listening is not constructive. Because, as we said, the important thing is that we're investigating, we're exploring together, not me as an authority. And I really mean that. As a Sangha, Sangha means spiritual community. It just doesn't mean just monks and nuns. It's a spiritual community of like-minded people exploring together, investigating together. So in that investigation, there is your own understanding. Because really, when it comes to Dhamma, the real teacher is you. You are the teacher, you are the student. In other words, your understanding is the teacher. And this is why the Buddha taught in such a radical way. He said, no, don't accept blindly what I'm saying. That is not wisdom. Investigate, question, see what is useful in your life. If you don't find it useful, try something else. A very radical way of teaching. So, in order to investigate, explore this very fascinating subject, it's important that we understand what the thought process is, and of course what the I is. Because when you ask that question, what happens to me when I die, or where do I go after death? It involves thinking, of course, and the I. It's very important to understand that. And also the nature of consciousness. Because as you know, thinking is one aspect of consciousness. And I've said in previous talks, very briefly, that we are in fact, not this permanent individual entity called I, or Mr. Tan or Miss Go, but we are actually a process of body and mind. And we're alive because we're a process. If we weren't a process, we wouldn't be alive, constantly changing. And of course, we have to keep recharging this process. Just the way you recharge your cell phones. If you don't keep recharging this process of body and mind, of course, we just get weaker and weaker. And I say that because sometimes people say to me, okay, I have all this energy, but what happens when I die? Where does all this energy go? A very rational question. And then I would ask this person, where does the energy come from? Where does it come from? And of course they have no idea, but yet it's so obvious. Again, you have to recharge, right? You have to eat, drink, of course constantly breathing. But you see, we take these obvious facts for granted. And as you know, throughout history, many human beings have had the unfortunate situation where they just starved to death. No food, no nutrition. And you just got weaker and weaker, and then you just passed away. So as I mentioned before, you might not have heard the previous talks, that our names and the I that we use is just a social label. Because to communicate, we need labels, we need words, and we need personal labels and names. I, you, he, she, and names are social labels. But they're not who we really are. And I mentioned that in Western countries, people are so attached to their names. They identify so strongly with their names that if you call them by a wrong name, or you forget their name, or you pronounce their name incorrectly, they get upset. Big drama. But really, names are just social labels. So that is something we have to understand. That I is really a social label. Just like you, he, she, that we have to use. But really, in effect, we are this process of body and mind. And when you're on a meditation retreat, sometimes the main practice is to be in touch, is to really reflect on this fact, focusing, seeing this fact of this body and mind. Physical and mental process. And when you're mindful, you can see this reality in everything you do. Whether you're walking, eating, sitting, washing, cooking, anything, you can see this reality of there's just body and mind. But otherwise, it's just a concept. Like when I say, we're just the process of body and mind. And you say, oh yeah, interesting. But if you have not really investigated and trained your mind, it's still a concept. Just like when we hear that we're composed of the elements, Earth, water, heat, air, space, and consciousness is just a concept. And when I first read it or heard it, it was just still a concept. But when you have time and you investigate different parts of the body and you see what elements are involved, then the truth of the elements becomes more real, more intimate. It's no longer a concept. But of course, we need to spend that time. And of course, when you're busy, you don't have that time. And you're not in that frame of mind to really go deeply. And the deeper you go, it's totally fascinating. And as we said, we are this process of body and mind, and you go a bit deeper and you have the 5 aggregates. And again, when we first hear or read about the 5 aggregates, they seem a bit complicated. You know, physical form, feeling or perception, feeling or sensation, then perception, mental reaction, and consciousness. It seems a bit complicated. We don't see how these 5 things are related to our daily experience. And this is why I like to give a simple example of these 5 things working in daily life, and then you can relate to it. Because what is interesting is that these 5 things are working all the time in our daily life, but we're not aware of it because they happen so quickly, so fast. And I brought up this subject because really, on the social level, what we call social convention, using social language, we usually say somebody dies or somebody passes away. Perfectly normal. Because, because we live in a social world. But at a deeper level of practice and reflection, it's really this process of body and mind simply shuts down. It stops working. And on the level of the 5 aggregates, the 5 aggregates simply stop working. And when you investigate, you see that the 5 aggregates are not only constantly changing, but they're interdependent, interconnected, these 5 things. But because we don't have this deeper understanding, we often say, oh, consciousness continues after death. It's a very common belief. Consciousness continues somehow with the resulting karma, whether it's positive or negative. But consciousness continues. But when you really investigate, you realize you cannot separate consciousness from the other 4 aggregates because they're interdependent, interconnected. They work together intricately. It's like you cannot separate your nose from your face unless you do it surgically, because your nose is a part of your face. Just like your eyebrows, your eyes, your chin, your ears, your forehead, and so on. But why we do that? Why do we do that? Why do we separate consciousness? And we say it continues after death. And the answer is very clear. We don't really understand how these 5 things are working, how they're interdependent, interconnected, and partly because it's wishful thinking. So, oh yeah, consciousness continues. Because when we don't have this understanding, the insight, the practice, we want to continue somehow after death, don't we? And that's why we have so many different beliefs. Humans have created so many different beliefs in an afterlife. And it is very comforting, no doubt, that somehow you will continue. So this is one of the things we'll be investigating. Why do we want to continue? Because as you know, death is a great mystery, the great unknown. So naturally we want to know what happens after death. And if you're seeing, the dead body of, say, a loved one, family member or a close friend, of course, you're sad, you're upset, and you really wonder what has happened to the person. Where has the person gone to, the person that you knew and loved? Where is that person? Because when you look at a dead body, it's no longer a person. It's completely lifeless. No feelings, no thinking, no memory, no emotions, and no sense of I. And you wonder, where has this person gone to? It's the energy. So it's a great mystery, and you can understand why we ask this question. So as I mentioned, on the social level, I'll repeat it, we say somebody dies, somebody passes away, but when you go a bit deeper, see, just the body-mind process simply shuts down, it stops working. And on the level of the five aggregates just stop working. Very simple. And when you go a bit deeper, I'm not sure if we'll have time tonight, one is actually able to go beyond the idea of birth and death. When you get at that deep level of elements and atoms and energy. But that is very profound reflection. And tomorrow at the retreat, because we'll have more time, we'll be exploring this, about the elements. So what is this I, as we said? When we say, what happens to me when I die and where do we go after death? And this I is a social label, and we naturally ask that question. And as human beings, we have this thought process, and we are not taught to understand the process, and of course we don't have an early education about the benefits of mindfulness, so we get totally caught, trapped in the thought process. In other words, we identify totally with the thought process, and we believe all the stories, all the images, all the movies, the dramas, the worries, the fears, our desires, our frustrations, feelings of insecurity, and so on. We believe it. We believe all these things. And of course, every time we say I, the mind that says I, we think this I is who we are. And I also believe that before I had some awakening and some Dharma understanding. And that is what we call neurosis. Neurosis is when we're caught in the thought process, and we're deluded by it. And most of us do suffer from some degree of neurosis, whether it's mild, medium, and of course very neurotic. And if you've ever met a very neurotic person, you understand what I'm trying to say. Somebody is totally trapped in the thought process, no awareness. And of course they're very attached to I, what the mind says I, the mental image, the idea of I. And when you have that delusion, that trap, that mental trap, naturally one experiences a great deal of fear and insecurity. And you're always concerned about what I'm going to achieve, what I want, and of course what people are thinking about me, right? That's one of the fears we have. Later on we'll be speaking about fear, understanding the nature of fear and insecurity. And one of the fears we have when we're very insecure, when we don't understand ourselves, is the fear of public opinion. What people are saying about us, and of course what people are thinking about us. And you know, you can never stop people from talking. And of course you can never stop people from thinking. Yeah, so what happens to me when I die? So again, we have to understand that this I is a social label and it is created by thinking. And thinking, as we mentioned before, is related to three things in the mind: memory, past experience, and knowledge, information. And when you observe your mind, you see this. It's very simple. Memory, past experience, knowledge, information. You can see how thinking is related to that. It's a response to memory, past experience, knowledge, information. And thinking has that propensity, that ability to project in the future. Right? And all our minds do this. So thinking is a movement in time. From past to future, past to future. And all our minds do that. It's so obvious. And as I said before, it doesn't matter what language we think in. Hokkien, Cantonese, French, Russian, Japanese, Spanish. It's the same thought process. Same thought process. Coming from the past and projecting in the future. That is the conditioning of the mind. And of course, this was something that the Buddha understood very clearly. Because through his efforts, he was able to improve his quality of awareness, mindfulness, which is the unconditioned state of mind. It's not related to thinking. It's not related to past and future. Because past and future is a conditioning of the mind. It's something we learn. But awareness is different. It's something we're born with, and it's always present. Always now. So in other words, the awareness we had as young children is the same awareness we have today. It doesn't change. The only difference is that as adults, and we have some Dharma practice, we're able to understand it much more clearly. So this is important to understand if we're going to investigate this very fascinating subject. What happens to me when I die, and where do I go after that? Because it is related to our thinking process, the conditioning. And of course, the I, the self, the ego, or some people call it soul, is a part of that conditioning. It's constructed by thinking, by the thought process. And when you investigate, you see that it is also related to past and future, who we are or who we think we are. As I mentioned before, when you investigate about who we are, you begin to see that who we are is just a collection of memories. All our family history, everything we have been through. And you see this fact more clearly when you meet someone for the first time. And naturally you speak about yourselves. And when you speak about yourselves, you speak about all your past history. Family history, education history. If you're in the working world, your work history. All the books you have read, movies you have seen, TV programs that you have watched, and now internet, all the things you have seen on the internet. And if you have travel experiences, you speak about your travel experiences. And some experiences are pleasant, some are unpleasant. And with all this information, all this memory of personal history, we project that. We have future plans, don't we? Certain goals, certain what we call hopes and dreams in the future. So you see how the self, the condition of self, is related to the thinking process. It is a construction of the thinking process. As past and future. Past and future. And as we go through life, we have more and more attachments. More experiences, more memories, more attachments. And then we're faced with this great mystery, the great unknown of death. And death means the ending, the letting go of all our attachments. And that is very scary, isn't it? Very scary. Everything we've known and all our attachments, it means the ending of all this. So naturally, there's the fear of the unknown. Because death is the great unknown. And before we mentioned as a good example of demonstrating how the sense of self is related to memories is a situation where somebody is suffering from amnesia, temporary memory loss. You've had head damage, head injury from an accident, and suddenly you've lost your memory. Amnesia. And why it is so disconcerting when you lose your memory, meaning, it's very confusing, very scary, is that when you lose all your memory, you don't know who you are, right? Because who you are is identified with all your memory, all your past history, all your collection of everything you have experienced. And that's why the experience of amnesia is so confusing, so scary. Now, death is the great unknown, no doubt. And there is fear. And there's a reason for that. Because thinking, as I've just explained, is related to all that we know. Right? Memory, past experience, knowledge, information. All our thinking consciousness is related to these things, that which we know. And death is the great unknown. So our normal thinking mind, or mental consciousness, it cannot relate to the unknown. Do you see that? Because it's based on that which we know. It's like a fish trying to relate to the experience of riding a bicycle. It cannot relate to that experience, can it? Or driving a car or using internet. A fish cannot relate to these experiences, that's obvious. So likewise, our thinking mind, and of course the I, which is a part of that movement, cannot relate to the unknown. Hence the fear, fear of the unknown, the great mystery. So what does our thinking mind, what does it do to compensate for this great mystery, its inability to relate to death? Because there's fear. What thinking does, because it is its nature to project in the future. From the past, thinking projects itself beyond death. And it says, of course, I will continue after death. Very interesting. And this is why humans have created so many different beliefs in an afterlife. It's very comforting. That's what thinking does. To compensate for this great unknown which it cannot understand. It cannot relate to. And you could actually do an entire thesis, even a PhD thesis, in all the different, countless beliefs that humans have invented to compensate for this great mystery, this great fear. And believe me, reincarnation and rebirth is only one belief. There are many, many, many beliefs. If you're a Christian, you'd like to believe that, I will go to heaven. I will have eternal life after death. It is very comforting. And of course, if you're a Hindu, you believe in reincarnation. And if you speak to a Hindu, they will say, no problem. It's like taking off an old jacket and putting on a new jacket or a new coat. Very comforting. And if you follow Pure Land Buddhism, I'll be reborn in the Pure Land. Very comforting. And for some Buddhists, I'll take rebirth. Hopefully with good karma. But if I've created bad karma, ayo, I had rebirth. What to do? Maybe I should change my belief. And for some people, you'd like to believe, if I'm a famous writer, my books will continue. I will continue in my books. And I remember watching interviews of old Hollywood movie stars that I grew up with. They would often say, I will live forever in my movies or in my TV shows. And it's very comforting. And in a way, they're right. In a way, they're right. And in the traditional Chinese belief is, when you're a traditional Chinese man, you are very keen to have sons and grandsons. And there's a reason for that. Because you believe that as long as the family name continues, sons, grandsons, great-grandsons, I will continue somehow. And of course, the daughters are not important because they don't carry the family name, right? Especially when they get married, because they have to change their name, the in-law. And that's why the traditional Chinese man is so keen to have sons, grandsons, the idea of the family name. I will continue somehow. Of course, it's an illusion, but it's still a comforting thought. Comforting thought. So where do we go after death? That's right. That's $1 million question, or the million ringgit question in Malaysia. Now, in meditation practice, when we allow the mind to become silent, when we allow the thought process to stop by itself, because you can't force the mind to stop thinking, but with practice, with patience, it will happen. And when you experience that silence of the mind and you have this understanding about the thought process, then you begin to understand that that silence, that stillness of the mind is the unknown. That's right, it is the unknown. Because when you investigate all these different beliefs that we have, that we continue, somehow you begin to see that it is thinking itself is afraid to come to an end. So when you investigate all the different beliefs that humans have created, in some form of afterlife, you see that it is thinking itself is afraid to come to an end. This energy, this movement from the past to the future. And when your mind is very agitated, very restless, very confused, it's very hard. It's very hard for the mind to be quiet, to be silent. And of course, you're afraid of silence. You're afraid of silence. The mind has to always be preoccupied. Just like some people, when they're very restless, agitated, they just can't stop talking. Right? They find silence very uncomfortable. It's like that. And this is why the Dharma practice is so essential. But when we allow the mind to be silent, we begin to understand that that silence is the unknown, the absence of thinking. I wonder if you see that. But you have to have this insight into the whole nature of thinking. And that who we really are is not thinking. It's just a part of the conditioning of the mind. But our wisdom mind, or the Buddha nature, is this awareness that can see the impermanent nature of thoughts, coming and going, and of course the I is just a label, it's just a thought. And you begin to trust in this present moment awareness, this knowing. In your practice, you begin to rest in this awareness and knowing. So it means that when we need to think, we think logically, rationally, and when we don't need to think, we come back to this awareness and knowing. So there's order in the mind. And that's why one of the advices the Buddha gave is not only when you see, just see, when you hear, just hear, when you think, just think, when you know, just know. That's what he meant. Think when you need to think, but when you don't need to think, you return to present moment awareness and knowing, the unconditioned. the wisdom mind. So there's order. And you don't waste mental energy. Because you know, most of the time, even when we don't need to think, the mind keeps thinking unnecessarily. Just keeps going on and on and on. It's like a machine that doesn't know when to stop. This is why the meaning of meditation in the Pali language means to train the mind, to cultivate the mind, to develop the mind. So it's not always reacting, always thinking, judging, criticizing, comparing, condemning, liking, not liking, wanting, not wanting, hating, having ill will, aversion, envy, jealousy, all these mental reactions. Because when we train the mind, we stop doing that. Because it's this habit of always reacting that creates your mental defilements. So when we experience that stillness, when we allow the mind to be still, and you understand that the stillness is the unknown, the absence of thinking, then there's no fear. There's no fear of the unknown. Because we experience the unknown as something very peaceful and timeless. No past, no future. And that experience of timelessness is very, very beneficial. Because if you're always caught in time, it creates anxiety, worry, fear, and of course stress. Right? Because time is a factor of, or stress, stress is time related. So much to do and so little time. It makes us anxious, makes us stressful. Or we say, I'm so many years old, time is getting short and there's so much to do, so much to achieve, and you have that anxiety. So time is one of the factors of fear. But when we can experience that timelessness, even for half an hour each day, you get to that, you come back to that state of peace and timelessness, the state of being, just learning how to be, not all this becoming, achieving, doing, having, regretting, and so on. Because as long as our minds are caught in this, this craving to achieve, to become, to have, regretting, with all that always is involved with some form of fear or anxiety. And I'm sure you've noticed that. Every time you want to achieve something or you want to have something, there's always some fear or anxiety that you won't get what you want, or you won't achieve what you want to achieve. And for some people, they become very anxious about achieving enlightenment or becoming an arahant. And of course, I must become an arahant as soon as possible. Because the ego is never patient. Right? You want instant results or as fast as possible. And this is why there are 2 or 3 spiritual teachers who attract people by speaking about instant enlightenment. And of course, there are some people who are fooled by this propaganda. It's really propaganda. So as we said, in the stillness of meditation, one experiences the unknown. peaceful and timeless. And so that question, that age-old question that we started off with, what happens to me when I die, where do I go after death, it does not arise. I wonder if you see that. There's no need for it to arise, because you experience it directly. But as long as we're trapped in thinking, right, and that attachment to the I, of course we keep asking that question. And we have that fear of the unknown. It's a very profound reflection, but when we reflect in it and we practice, it becomes very clear that silence, that stillness is the unknown. And there's nothing to fear. And I mentioned earlier, when you understand the nature of consciousness, you begin to see that not only is it constantly changing, it's not a permanent fixture in the mind, but every night when we go to bed and we fall asleep, we lose consciousness, we actually die. Every night we die for about 2 hours, mentally, of course. Physically the body might be alive, but mentally, psychologically, there is no consciousness, no thinking, and therefore no I. Because it's the thinking that creates the I, right? That's very clear. And if you're wondering about dreaming, when the mind comes out of that deep sleep state, then the thought process starts up again. And that's what we call the dream state. And if you observe your dreams and you quickly write them down before you forget, you'll see that most of our dreams are really just memories all mixed up. Have you ever noticed that? All mixed up. And sometimes it includes certain fantasies that you have, certain desires, even anxieties, right? Sometimes it comes out in your dream, right? You have anxious dreams sometimes. And of course, if you have an important event coming up or an appointment, very often you'll dream about it. And you're taking a trip somewhere, right? And of course you're excited about going somewhere, very often you'll dream about it. And sometimes if you're anxious, you'll dream about preparing for your trip and you missed your flight. It happens to the best of us. That's the nature of dreams. And as you know, very quickly they're forgotten. And that is what the wisdom is and the practice of mindfulness, when you observe all our mental formations, our thoughts, ideas, beliefs, views, and opinions, they really are like dreams. Yeah. They're not permanent, nothing solid there. This is why the Buddha said, with mindfulness we observe all these mental formations and we learn to let them go. Because if we cling to them, there's only, conflict, suffering, anxiety, and so on. And that's why people who cling to their ideas, views, and opinions, and beliefs, and so on, and they get into arguments, sometimes even fights, just about what you're thinking, you can see the ignorance and the delusion involved. And this is what happens to dictators. They have a certain idea or a belief and they cling to it, they identify with it, because they don't have the wisdom. And they think this is truth, this is real. And then you get into a position of power and you impose that belief, that idea on thousands and thousands of people, and you end up creating, unimaginable suffering and death. This has happened so many times in human history. just because of this delusion that what we think is real. When we identify with certain ideas, certain beliefs, and you think it's true. It's human delusion, human delusion. I just do a reading here. We believe that a self exists, that there's a permanent, concrete, separate and independent ego entity which sees, hears, tastes, smells, feels and thinks. We believe that a self lives and dies. We believe that other selves exist. This is incorrect view of reality. What we take for self is only ever-changing phenomena. In reality, there is no I, no he, no she. These are just labels for social communication. We spend our life dreaming about things that don't really exist. Our wrong view causes us attachment and suffering. We have expectations of ourselves and others. And if these do not come through, we suffer from frustration, disappointment, anger, and so on. We are afraid of death and we do not know what happens to the self after we die. It would be most beneficial if we could see our life as it really is, only changing phenomena. Then we could face with right understanding old age, sickness, and death. All phenomena in ourselves and around ourselves are only two kinds of realities: mental and physical phenomena, nama and rupa, as we just explained. Mental and physical process. What we take for self or a person are only changing phenomena, only mental and physical process. This includes animals and insects. Emotions are also transitory and empty of self. Our whole life is like a chain of moments of consciousness arising and falling away. When we realize that our life is actually only mental and physical process and phenomena which arise due to conditions, we become more patient even in difficult situations. Mindfulness, awareness, is mental phenomena which arises with a wholesome moment of consciousness, mindfulness. There is no person or individual, only different mental and physical phenomena, appearing and disappearing. Clinging to people brings sorrow. Eventually, we shall have to take leave of our loved ones and friends. Nothing is permanent. Through the development of insight, clinging to a person or a concept of a person who exists, can be eradicated. The Buddha saw that at the very root of suffering was a belief in a self, in a permanent entity, which is separate and permanent. Because of this belief, we are compelled to protect and gratify and worry about it. At the deepest level, the Buddha responded to the suffering he saw by helping people to awaken to the realization of selflessness, impermanence, and unsatisfactoriness. Now, one of the interesting things also about this mystery of life and the mystery of death is because we're conditioned in this thing called duality. That I am separate from the world. I'm separate from things that I see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and even what I think. You are all conditioned like this. The senses are sensing by themselves. As you know, we experience the world through the senses. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. And this was one of the insights of the Buddha. He saw that the senses were sensing by themselves. That seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking were automatic experiences. But because as human beings we have that habit of identifying with these experiences, because we use language, we say, I am seeing something. I am hearing something. I'm tasting something. I'm smelling something. I'm feeling some touch sensation. And of course, I am thinking. Now, when we do that, we create a duality. First there is seeing, and then when we say, I am seeing something, we create a duality. Subject and object. Do you see that? The I becomes the subject. Whereas initially, there's only seeing. There's no one who's actually seeing. Initially, we don't see that, but with practice, reflection, we begin to see that. That actually, for example, you don't have to make an effort to see the speaker, do you? There's only seeing. As long as your eyes are healthy, you just look and they're seeing. But then when you say, I am seeing the speaker, you create that duality of a seer or an observer who is seeing the speaker. Do you see that duality? Subject and object. Same with hearing. You don't have to make an effort to hear, do you? As long as your ears are healthy, hearing consciousness arises automatically. Sound vibration enters the ears, vibrates the eardrum, the brain picks it up, and there's hearing consciousness. Just like tasting. Tasting is automatic. And if you're not sure about this, later when you go home tonight and you eat something, say to yourself, okay, now I'm going to be very aware and I'm going to taste this. I'm going to eat this thing and I'm going to really try not to taste this food. See what happens. You can't avoid tasting to arise. As long as you have taste buds on your tongue, tasting will arise. Same with smell, right? Smell, as long as your nose are not stuffed up and so on. Smelling consciousness arises, automatic. But again, we identify with that experience and we say, I am smelling something. It's nice or it stinks. I like, I don't like. So you create a duality between the smeller and the smell. Just like the taster and the flavor of the food. Like the listener or the hearer is separate from sound. And the seer or the observer separate from the physical object. And the same thing with thinking. I am thinking. We think that there's a thinker separate from thoughts. And that's an illusion. And this is why many people, even during the Buddha's time or before the Buddha's time, some of the forest yogis, they would sit and they would try to stop thinking. Force the mind to stop thinking. Because they believe, that I, the thinker, I'm going to stop thinking. And this is how migraine headaches began. Serious headaches. Trying to stop thinking. Because what they didn't realize that I, the thinker, is not separate from thoughts. It's a part of thinking. When you say I am thinking, it's just thinking. Of course, when you practice, you can see that obvious fact. The thinker is thought. Thinker is the thought. So because we have this duality, we're conditioned, we feel that this I is separate from the world. And that's why one of the questions we ask regarding death is, where do I go after death? And of course, we are, language is often misleading. Because we often say that, I came into this world, or we came into this world. Now look at that statement a little closer. We came into this world, I came into this world. It gives the impression somehow that we came from somewhere else, a different solar system, and we landed here in our spacecraft, UFO of course, because the government didn't notice us. And we landed here on this planet and we're aliens. We're outsiders. Do you see what I'm trying to point at? The illusion that, we're separate somehow, and we came here as outsiders, as aliens, as tourists. But in truth, we didn't come into this world, as outsiders, aliens from another planet, but rather we came out of the world. We came out of the world like flowers, leaves, and fruits from trees. You see the difference? We came out of the planet. We are truly earthlings. We belong here. We're not aliens. We came out of the energy, all the elements, and the energy, of course, from the sun and atoms. You see the difference? We came out of the world, not we didn't come into the world, we came out of it. And we are aspects of the planet, with all this energy and elements in this temporary form, being aware of itself. We are aspects of the planet in this temporary physical form, being aware of itself. And on a more cosmic scale, we are the universe in this physical form, temporary physical form, composed of elements and energy, being aware of itself. Just like waves from the surface of the ocean. That's a good model to reflect on, the surface of the ocean. Waves rise and fall, but the ocean remains the same. Waves are water, water are waves. Waves are not separate from the ocean. Likewise, we are not separate from all the energy elements on this planet. This is one of the profound reflections on the Dhamma of non-self emptiness, no separation, no duality. So there's no fear, no anxiety. So regarding that question, where do I go after death? There is nowhere to go. And I'm sure some of you won't be happy to hear that. Because you want to go somewhere, right? That's right. But when you have this understanding, you have, more peace, less anxiety. Because you're able to go beyond the illusion, that I am a separate, entity. That's right. On that profound level of elements and atoms, we won't have time to go into the elements this evening. But, atoms are often referred to as cosmic energy. Maybe you've heard this, because everything is composed of atoms. Even what we see around this room, everything, including, us, even this clock. Everything is composed of atoms. And that's why it's referred to as cosmic energy. And you may recall the first law of science that you learned in high school. Can you remember that law? Energy cannot be created or destroyed. You remember that one? It can only change its form, and it can move from one place to another. That's right. So on that profound level of reflection, one is able to go beyond the idea of birth and death. Very profound. But it's a wonderful reflection. Everything is just energy. No birth, no death. No I, no you, no he, no she. No Mr. Go or Miss Tan. No Bhante. Yes, no Bhante. Definitely no Bhante. There's great freedom in that. The teaching of emptiness. And emptiness doesn't mean, nothingness, because very often we think it means nothingness, or like, vacuum. What do you mean, emptiness, nothingness? But emptiness simply means empty of something. For example, a cup, you can say it is empty of water, but it is full of air, or full of space. So likewise, regarding the mind, the nature of consciousness, emptiness means empty of thoughts, of mental formation, which means a silent, spacious mind with awareness, because awareness is spacious by nature. And when the mind is silent, we experience that space, spacious awareness. Whereas if the mind is always preoccupied, there's no space in the mind, right? Because all your thoughts take up all the space in your mind. And this is why when we're thinking too much, too preoccupied, you can feel your mind contracting. It's tense. The mind is tense, contracting. It's not calm, it's not relaxed. And the space is one of the elements. And why space is an element is because there's space inside the body and space outside the body. Just like we're sitting in the space of this room. If this room was filled with boxes, say from floor to ceiling, we wouldn't be able to sit in this room. And once you go out there, there is vast, immense space, unimaginable space. And there's a wonderful reflection about the solar system. By human scale, the solar system is so vast, when you think of it, by human size, human scale. The solar system is so vast. And yet, it is just a speck of dust inside the Milky Way galaxy. Think of it. A speck of dust inside the Milky Way galaxy. And the sun is only one star of millions in just one galaxy. And to further boggle the mind, there are countless galaxies. But we don't have to go too far. Just one galaxy is enough to show you where we are, or who we are, and where we are. There's a very wonderful saying here. It says, "Empty-handed I came into this world, barefooted I leave it. My coming, my going. Two simple happenings that got complicated and confusing in between." Empty-handed I came into this world, barefooted I leave it. My coming, my going. Two simple happenings that got complicated and confusing in between. Very good one. And there's a nice Tibetan saying that goes, when we're born, we cry, but the world rejoices. People are happy. And when we die, the world cries, but we may attain the great liberation, freedom from suffering. Very beautiful. Yeah. Now, at this time, I would like to invite questions. And please don't ask me about past karma and rebirth. Because if you ask that question, it means that you have not understood a word I've been saying this evening.
Bhante, one question.
Yes.
You're talking about the mind focusing on the past and the future in between. But how do you place goals, personal goals? Because you're basically looking at the future and setting standards or wanting to achieve
Yes.
some. How do you?
Yes, that's a good question. Because people often say, the Dharma is about focusing on the present moment. But how about future plans, future goals? It's a good question. Yes, sometimes we have to have certain plans, certain goals regarding the future. It's natural. But what happens is that if we become too obsessed, too attached about achieving those goals, we experience a lot of anxiety and the fear of not achieving those goals. So yes, have those goals, have those plans, but don't obsess about them, in other words. Make them tentative, flexible. Because the thing is that the future is uncertain. Because sometimes you make goals and sometimes your priorities change. Or sometimes you achieve something and you're very disappointed because it's not what you expected. And yes, sometimes we achieve a certain goal and we have a sense of, achievement, satisfaction, but it doesn't last very long. Somebody once said about 2 weeks maximum. And then when that, feeling of achievement goes, then the mind wants to achieve something else. Okay? Yeah. So have those goals, have those plans in mind, but keep them tentative. Don't be too obsessed about them. Yeah. Because then, as I said, you're asking for a lot of, anxiety, worry, fear, and so on. Once I was reading about certain people who were able to achieve all their goals in life. All the plans, all the goals they had set out, they managed to achieve them. And yes, they felt happy. They felt a sense of success, achievement. But when that sense of achievement faded away, you know what happened? They began to panic. They began to panic. Can you understand why? Because they were so used to, having a goal in mind, working towards the goal. And they began to panic simply because there were no more goals to achieve. Because the craving mind wants to achieve a goal. And in their panic, in their confusion, they set another goal for themselves, even although they don't need another goal. It's a very interesting phenomenon. And what was so interesting after I read this, I got an email from a friend in Singapore. And would you believe he was suffering from the same thing? He was a brilliant emergency doctor. And he was one of these people he was a child, young child. He was one of those children who was always A plus. You know, A plus, not A. And he was one of those students that if he got an A, that would be a failure. When he told me that, I was tempted to give him a good slap. Especially if you're like, a C student. And if you get a B, you're happy. He was that smart. So you can imagine when he entered medical school, no problem, right? A plus. But he kept competing. I had to be the #1 medical student. So that was what he was used to. But when he began to learn some Dharma, he began to understand the suffering behind it. So here he was now. He had taken all the right courses, to complete, being a fully qualified emergency doctor. 6 months in Taiwan, studying Mandarin, of course, and 6 months in the United States. He had completed everything to be a fully qualified emergency doctor. And he started working, felt, happy, a sense of achievement. And yes, after that feeling faded away, he began to panic. Yes, because he had no more goals to achieve as an emergency, doctor. He began to panic. It's a craving mind. So in desperation, he thought, I got to take a course, a bachelor's degree in some form of science. It's like wanting a hole in your head, something you don't need. And he said, what should I do? And I was very direct with him, and he said, it's time you sat on your bottom and learn how to be. Not all this becoming, striving, achieving. Learn how to be. That's right. That is a state of wisdom. Just learn how to be. No achieving, no regretting, Just a peace of just being. And he said also, the head of the department, of the hospital in Singapore, he was going to retire, and the staff wanted him to take over as the head of the department. It would mean, of course, higher salary, but longer hours in administration, which would have very little to do with emergency medicine. And he and his wife had young children at the time, what to do. And I said, don't take that position. Don't you take it. Yeah. And he said, children are young, time goes fast, spend quality time with your children and help your wife. That is more important. So he thanked me for that advice. Especially, sit on your bottom and learn how to be. That's right. But it's a craving mind, isn't it? Have to achieve, have to become. Any other questions? Any other questions?
After we did after we died, how about the burning the house and burning the car? Did the dead people receive it? My father will get the car, a motorbike, and a bike. So did he receive it or not? Or just please my mother or what? How about it?
But you can understand why people do this, right? Again, it's the belief in spirits. That your departed family member, they exist in spirit in spirit form. So by burning these things, that they will get these things. That is like spending money, right? Burning paper money, because of course your spirits need money for shopping, for eating. Makan, right? They need for makan, right? Spending. And now they have the credit card form, which is much more convenient. But it's wishful thinking, that you're helping. Yeah, somehow they need these things, yeah? But it's just in the mind, just in the mind. But in a way, it's a nice thought. It's a nice thought, but it's a waste of money. Yes.
Just now you were explaining is that through meditation, through sitting, be familiar with the unknown, the stillness and all this. Okay. So, but at the time that the moment you are going away, you will go back into that stillness, this position to go off, to not to be afraid of the unknown. Am I?
No. Through your practice, you experience, you understand that stillness, that silence is the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
So you're no longer afraid of the unknown.
Okay. But what if when the person towards the passing away that does not have this kind of mind, the alertness of the mind, then
Or you're saying if somebody does not
Yeah.
have that understanding,
Yeah.
of course. Well, the important thing is for you yourself to have that experience and to have that understanding. Yeah. But I can understand if people do not have this understanding and they're trapped in thinking, then of course whatever belief they would like to have, that gives them some comfort, some continuity, that's fine. That's also fine for them. Whether you want to believe in reincarnation, rebirth, Pure Land, eternal life after death, being with God or Shiva or some bodhisattva, it's fine for them.
just further than that, it's just like, let's say you're practicing, okay, but unfortunately at the time that's going to all go off, but you are not in an alertness mind, that you're on medication or something like that, then how?
Observe the worry. Observe the worry. You see what thinking does? That's right. It creates anxiety, worry. It makes you confused. Which means you need to practice. Keep practicing. Keep practicing. Okay? And you will have no doubt. You will have no doubt. That's right. Yes?
Question. I'm just trying to understand whether I understand the sutta wrongly. You recall, I think in the first sermon, Buddha already mentioned rebirth through his recall of past life. So I'm not sure whether do I understand what he said correctly or not.
As I mentioned before, I think you were here the other morning when I mentioned about past lives, is that when you practice and you reflect on this, you begin to see that we have been through many lives in this life. Because normally when we think about a past life, it's a life separate from this life. But honest, even if you have a memory, it's still not important. It's still not important. When you practice in this life, you begin to see that we have been through many lives since early childhood. And it is so obvious, especially when you look at the photos. Remember I mentioned that? If you look at all your photos from early childhood, until recent photos, you can see that obvious fact. We're always changing because we're a process of body and mind. Rupa nama, rupa nama.
But I understand. I think it's what Buddha say.
Again, don't give me this what Buddha say thing, because there was no Sony recording machine, there was no video camera on the Buddha. Please question. And you need to practice. You need to practice. because you're still attached to thinking, and thinking is not going to give you wisdom, the understanding.
So Bhante, you were saying that when I read the sutta, I need to question it.
Of course, question everything.
Including what's written on the sutta.
Yes, and you're speaking to a former Christian, who people, they would, accept the Bible without question, because fear, right? You're going to be punished by God. So when I see Buddhists who are, just quoting, it's the same thing to me. It's the same thing. You got to question. Practice, investigate. Then the Dhamma is in the heart, not in the mind. And when the Dhamma is in the heart, there is no doubt. There is peace. There's wisdom. That's right. Thinking, as we said, we need thinking, but you begin to see it's very, very limited. Thinking is very limited, just like knowledge. And one of the limitations of thinking is that thinking is very, not only is it superficial, but thinking can only see things in, in fragments. Thinking can see things in isolation. It cannot see the whole. Because life is a complex web of interrelationships, interconnectedness. It's a vast dimension, complex. And thinking cannot grasp that complexity. And that's why thinking is limited. Because life is very complex if you really investigate. I'll go into this another day. It is so complex, intricately, interconnected, interdependent. And our normal everyday thinking, or reactive thinking, cannot grasp that complexity. Because thinking is very shallow. In other words, it is linear reality. Linear. You know what linear means, right? That's right. So to see things deeply, the complexity of life, we need to calm the mind and we can go deeply. Then you see the complexity of life. How amazing and wonderful it is. So thinking is very limited in that way. Yeah. It's just linear reality. Right? And it's always trapped in time. Past and future. Past and future. And of course when you practice you begin to see that. Only thinking. That's all. Coming and going.
So one day what you say is the most important thing is to meditate.
And reflect.
Yeah.
Reflect, investigate.
Sutta is just a guide.
That's right.
Bhante,
Yes.
can you share something about the near-death experience? Is it something that is temporary for the mind and body?
Well, I've never had a near-death experience, but I've heard people speaking about it, even on television, right? I mean, it is interesting, but as far as I'm concerned, it is a temporary experience.
It really happens?
Yes, of course, it happens. But the important thing is, what can you learn from it? Now, some people say it gives them more peace. They're able to accept death more easily. And some people see this light, but it's all embracing, all loving. And when they see that light, they're never afraid of death anymore. Some people have that experience and some people don't have that experience yet. Yes?
I've been asked this question by a relative on what kind of chants that she can perform for her elderly mother who is on the verge of dying.
Yes.
I was not able to help her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I would say any chanting that she likes. Yeah, any chant I think is good. You know, anything that's very soothing, very calming, very soothing.
The old person, she's suffered a stroke, and she has been a practicing Buddhist, but now she does not like to listen to chanting. She likes all the music of her childhood, of the 40s.
Perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. Yeah, exactly. Anything that she likes is fine. Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't have to be Buddhist chanting. And believe, you know, I love to listen to all types of chanting, all types.